Hello, Jeff Berlin. Here we
Hello.
are again.
How are you, Mark Smith? How are you?
For the third time.
Third time for the charm.
So I wanted to get together with you again to clarify a lot of the stuff that you, or your message, I suppose you could call it a message, but it's your take on what you call academic teaching, which I tend not to like the term, to be honest. I know that you like that term, and I know that it's you say it a lot, but I just, every time I hear you say that, I just think traditional method. I just think of traditional teaching methods, as in the classical tradition.
Right.
So what I wanted to do is give examples of what that is and to clarify that, because I know that whenever you talk about it, be it on Facebook or wherever it is, clinics, right, all that stuff, you will keep using that term, yes, but without really defining it in a thorough manner. And I think it's partly because you'll just possibly assume that people kind of know what you mean, but also it's well, anyway, I'll get onto it. So what I'm going to do is give examples of it. So in terms of the traditional method, everything begins usually with reading the very basic, music notation and it's a progressive method of gradually building up melodically, rhythmically, register, building up a progressive repertoire, basically coaching through that. And it's usually better to do these things with a one-on-one tutor, because right, I mean, you can always pick up a book and try working your way through it, but good luck with that. And
yeah, I wouldn't recommend it either. By the way, I want to let people know that if I look off to my right, the camera is here, but the screen is here, because I have a window on here. And so in order to make things visible, so if I want to see Mark, I got to look this way.
So I've prepared a few little screenshots of things just to give examples of what Jeff means, right?
Right.
So there's a few obvious in terms of double bass, because that's got more of a classical background. You've got things like this. So this one's Simandl method. You can see on the left of the screen, we've got basically the first page of Simandl, and then you've got a much more on the right. It's one of the more complex parts of it. Then here's another example. Here's the Francois Rabath technique. Again, on the left there, you can see, well, actually, these are pages 1 and 2, but you can see how it starts out very, very simple, half notes, working its way up, just bringing in different arpeggios and different scalar fragments and things like that as you're working through, which, right, and bowing techniques, obviously, with double bass, which doesn't apply to electric. But right, then we've also got something that possibly you might have even worked on, Jeff, at some point. So this is the Sevchak violin studies, starting with very basic scalar fragments, working up various bowing techniques as you work through. On the left-hand side, very straightforward, and then right-hand side, obviously, much more difficult as it's progressed through. So this is the kind of stuff that Jeff talks about. Studies on chord structures. This is the trombone studies. This isn't a classical methodology. This is a similar kind of thing, working through etudes.
This is a jazz methodology.
Yes, very popular. And I think you actually used to. I think you kind of popularized that in a way, didn't you? The viola thing.
I popularized it because when I was attending Berklee, they didn't have, back in 72, 73, 74, 75. I did about 3 semesters there. And went on because I was working a bit too. So when I was there, I didn't find any literature to help me. So I went to the bookstore, and again, I'm an ex-violinist. So I saw the trombone book and I said, well, let me have that, and noticed what it was and associated it with as one of the greatest sources of music in order to learn how to play, in this case, approach notes in different keys and in different manners. So I found that book, I showed it to Richard Appleman, and then he had not thought of associating trombone music with electric bass. And it was from that little demo, he wrote the bass book. Yeah. So I would say historically, I'm the guy that introduced trombone music to the electric bass academic consciousness.
And that leads me to the thing that I was going to say. So the thing that obviously has frustrated you over the years, I think this has probably frustrated every bass teacher on the planet, is that there isn't a standard teaching method similar to Simandl, Rabath, Sevchak, all that stuff. There isn't, because it's not a classical instrument. It's, it was born of basically rock. It's more of a rock instrument and a pop instrument. So it's never had that kind of traditional methodology that you can then, if you're wanting to teach that kind of stuff, if you want to teach reading from a very basic level, you're basically going to make your own exercises. I mean, I just spend all my time, whenever I've been teaching, just creating my own stuff, and that is actually how my sight reading course that I have, that's how that was born. It's just all the exercises that I've gradually amassed over the years, giving them to students, because there isn't something like Simandl for electric bass. And I know that this is something that you've probably always been frustrated by. And hence, this is now on screen. These are just a couple of examples from Jeff's bass books. Is it Bass Mastery, or is it Reading for Bass?
Beginner reading. I wrote the book. I wasn't frustrated about it as much as I had trombone music that I had discovered that was very, very good for electric bass. There's one book, and I can't remember the name. I can see the cover. I taught a lot of beginner readers out of it. But I wrote the book in order to duplicate the classical ambiance, the classical situation, that this book was written for the non-bass reader, well, the very new bass reader. And it was written, I believe, might be the only book available for electric bass. I don't know about your material, so I apologize. But I wrote the book to be sequential, that this had to go to this, had to go to this, had to go to this, had to go to this. And even Simandl, Rabath, and these other ones don't do that really. So it
moves very quickly in especially in Rabath. It moves on fairly fast.
Well, understand something, that the nature of the Rabath and the Nanny and the Simandl books is that everybody that used those books, all Arco students of upright bass, all had bass teachers. There's a kind of I feel, an unfortunate decision by a great contingent of our friends, fans, followers, fellow bassists who have decided to teach themselves a subject that they really shouldn't be teaching themselves. A teacher will be fully responsible. In fact, ought to be completely responsible for your progress or people's progress. 100%. Your job, my job, our job was to do the work. That's it. I do this, and things will get better. So that's my little sort of comment about it, is that electric bass players are lacking what the upright book authors and all the students were privy to, which is somebody in charge of going through those books.
And I completely agree. I mean, like I said, I've got things like my reading methods, and I mean, there's a lot of people that do reading books, I suppose. And when it's very difficult to actually present them in a way that where they can't be done with a one-on-one tutor along. Now, I've kind of tried to get around that with video, so I'm kind of coaching you along through it, but it's still not perfect. And that's why I agree with you that all of these methods need somebody there to actually coach you through, because you just don't know. I mean, somebody could email me, they could email you and ask you questions. I mean, it's the beauty of social media these days. I mean, you're right there. I mean, I see people on your Facebook page all the time asking you questions about the actual exercises in there, and then you put them straight and that. But, it's very difficult for you to be on hand to answer every question about every little bit of technique that there might be involved in any one thing. Because, like you've said before, in teaching, something that in the whole scheme of music is very straightforward would be the subdivision and the division of bars, the subdivision of beats, those kind of things that you can explain incredibly quickly. And it's just I mean, let's face it, it's basically mathematical. I mean, it's on a very elementary level. I mean, the subdivision of beats, or at least binary subdivision of beats.
Well, it certainly is at its outset, but after a while, I mean, everything is difficult if one doesn't know how it works.
Yes.
Reading music isn't easy. It isn't hard. It isn't fun. It isn't not fun. Reading music is functionally, here's a note, put your finger on it. And the definitions of easy and the easiest and the worst and the most difficult and not applicable to gigs. Well, yes, it is. And it doesn't apply to what reading does. Reading mechanically gets us to relate a pitch, understand it, and physically represent it. And I cannot think of a more direct way that all of us can improve, at least in regards to investing money in a school or a teacher. And that's why I've sort of been for narrow instruction. We'll get back to these examples. I want to see them. But narrow instruction, my problem with broad, and that you can go here and take this in the morning and take this in the afternoon. And this teacher is different than that teacher. And this diversity. Diversity to me is antithetical to learning, because the requirements of all basically a beginner or near beginner or close to intermediate students doesn't require diversity. It requires similarity. Yeah. That the notes have to be the same. The approaches have to be the same. And that's why if I were king, I would have done away with most of what people might regard as meaningful music or teachers and stuff. And I just don't think people are getting taught well if broad and every possible contingent is available to you. I think a lot of people, I won't name people. I've gotten letters for a long time. I don't know if it's true or not, but people have graduated certain schools and they don't read and have ended up greatly in financial debt due to student loans, and have ended up regionally back into the regional performance scene, back in bars and back in playing gigs. And the reason is, in my opinion, is because they aren't trained even as similarly as an air conditioning refrigeration repairman is. Music is it's a product. It's a product like the car you bought, base education. I'm talking to everybody, by the way. Is this okay, Mark?
Yeah. This is great.
Music education is a product. This is a product like the restaurant you ate at last week. It's a product like the new amp you bought is a product. And people aren't, I feel, looking at being taught as consumers. And for that, and they're being taught as lovers of reputation. It's not a good, trustworthy way to learn. Art is different than playing. You know, people say like you play on gigs. I don't need it on a gig. Learning is not about gigs. Gigs may be a result of quality learning. Learning is not about anything. It's not even about art. All learning is to get you to unencumber yourself here and to understand music. Even fretboard harmony is a flawed concept, worldwide famous. It's really a backward concept. I can explain it in clinics and get into it later if you want. But my whole tenet is to get people to get narrow. Does this look narrow? I hope it looks narrow. To get narrow when you're taught, and then get broad when you play.
Yeah,
that's my whole.
Yeah, obviously, when you when you learn, I've said this loads. I mean, not that I'm the great, I'm not like you, but like the most important thing is to focus on certain things when you're learning. But it's like that thing that people always do when they always talk about practice routines and things like that. And they say, okay, you want this routine where you're going to practice scales for 10 minutes, and then you're going to do arpeggios for 10 minutes, and then you're going to, and it never works.
No, it doesn't. So,
I tried doing it once upon a time. When you're a kid, you've got all the time in the world. So I'd got like, however long it's going to be, 10 hours a day, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, for maybe 2 days, you might do it. Not that it really helps, but you might do it for 2 days, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks. You could do that. But then something gets in the way. You go on holiday, you go do something else. It's just not long. There's no longevity to it. And also, you don't get to focus on anything. And I think reading is the perfect example of that. That like, if you don't focus on reading for any amount of time, you just you just don't progress in the way that you need to. Yeah, I mean, fair enough. 10 minutes is okay, but really it needs to be a sustained thing, at least for the first, until you find your way with reading, because otherwise you just don't get anywhere. And I think that what you're saying there with that narrowing of stuff is probably the most important thing you can tell anybody, because it's so that focus on whatever you're going to do. You know, like if somebody came to you and they started asking you about learning to play jazz, let's say, or soloing or any of that kind of stuff,
right,
wouldn't give them a broad selection of things to do. It'd all be incredibly narrow and focused on specific things, because you can't teach otherwise.
That's in my opinion, the failure of contemporary schools that teach the electric bass. I'm sorry. I'm not doing this to cause schools harm. I'm doing this to support people that may be watching our little chat and give them the information to think about. But the failure that I had always felt that comes out of contemporary schools is that they, at least from what I've seen, don't know how to teach specific things specifically to everybody. And I'm not sure, it became a thing where, just to reiterate, you were talking about broad versus narrow, right?
Yeah.
So that just seems to be an not understood concept. That, I mean, you go to swimming, you go into the shallow end and you do this 2 times and I'm going under. I mean, I'm talking like football, soccer, a big sport in England. You know, you don't run through the line there. You kick the ball and you step to the left. It's pieces. And it interests me that people might spend $20,000-$30,000 a semester to be taught music, that a regional teacher could teach you for 50 quid. And I'm not sure of the logic of this, when it would really behoove everybody, if you want to learn how to play or learn how to read, start with a bar of music. What's this bar of music? Can you pull up a bar or pull up a piece of paper here?
I've got yours right there. I mean,
all right, let's look at let's go to the etude A. First note is E. If you don't know that that's an E, that's fine. That's where you start.
Yeah.
That E is a whole note. That's 4 beats. That E would be played on this string. So read that note. Somebody will maybe do it clumsily or hesitantly, which makes sense. It's new. It's like swimming at the first. And you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 things just happened. You learned exactly as Shostakovich did, and I mean that, and you also broke the ice. Now, a teacher, I think one of the reasons why it's hard to find teachers like Mark or teachers that are music oriented is because bass education tends to have encouraged not putting a lean focus on learning music as every orchestra instrument is taught by. Electric bass is the rarity. It has sort of the ear of 2 or 3 trend-setting bass teachers who have changed policy for everybody, and it might not have noticed that all classical musicians are practically taught practically the same way, using practically the same material, practice in the same kind of way. So it's the reason why you won't find teachers in your town that can teach you how to read, because a legacy of the 20 years of everything works and whatever works for you is okay, and tab, which isn't in schools. I don't think schools do use tab. I don't know. Net graphs and all of these things is actually prevented people from being encouraged to learn music so that they can teach it to you today. That's why there's a legacy of the popularity, I feel, of the bass system that people are supporting that isn't giving them what they want. That's how I feel about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a first of all, I've got something else to show you to work through in a second. But I completely agree with everything that you said, and But I will give you in a minute. I'll give you an alternative take on a part of the bass community. But first of all, because I really want to get through some of this stuff to do with your teaching methods. So
I'll be quiet.
Yeah. So you can't see it, but I'm going to read it out. So this is something that you put on your Facebook page that I was very taken with, and I'm going to keep it saved in this. I've got it on a text file, and I'm going to use it as an example in future for people that want to know about learning. So this was something that you presented to somebody. I think they had just bought your book. They were just starting on this was a few days ago. They bought one of your methods, and you gave them some hints and some tips just about how to go forward with it. So I'm going to read it out, and I'm going to expand on each bit, and you can comment on it as I go. So for number one, it was go slow. If you haven't read music before, realize that you can read these etudes for the next 12 months or more if necessary. So go slow. Don't try to speed up reading unless this occurs naturally. Take your time. There is no rush whatsoever. So that, to begin with, I think there's 10 tips that you give in this, and that's brilliant. First one.
Cheers.
Second, practice every day. Read for, say, 30 minutes a day, less if you are new and need time to experience this new form of musical investigation. Regular practicing is the trick. Again, great tip. I mean, they're not even tips. It's just it's a
tip. Take it or leave it.
How to go forth and read. Number three, take breaks. Practice until you feel that you've had enough. Honor that. Take a break and then go back and resume your reading. Never practice in distress, as this is antithetical to quality learning. So yeah, another great tip there that, because people can suffer just burnout, when you...
Oh, they can, and they do. They don't need to.
Yeah. And then you lose interest if you end up getting burned out.
Absolutely true.
So then number four, review. Reviewing your work confirms that you are learning or have learned what you've been practicing. Reviewing can be as beneficial as any approach in academic learning that you can find. Again, yep, perfect. You've got to go back over. And that's all of these things. You've not seen it, but my sight reading thing that I've got, I have people all the time basically going at it, and I have to tell them to slow down and go back over the exercises. Don't just move on to the next page. Don't keep just pushing forward. Go back over. Keep
absolutely wonderful on it.
Because if you don't do that, you just I sometimes describe it wrongly as muscle memory. It's not muscle memory. It's just,
no, it isn't.
It's the knowledge that it's knowing that note equals that fret equals that position equals that. It's the move, because when you're sight reading, you don't do any of that kind of like reading a note and then finding the note and doing it. It becomes an automatic process. It becomes an instinctive process. Otherwise, you can't be reading it. But at the start, it's not. And you've got to allow that to happen. And it only happens through review. So again, that's... am I right in thinking that
I agree 100%. The idea behind it is that's my sort of reason for, I'm not a metronome fan, as people may know. Practicing isn't about perfection. Practicing is about familiarity. And that's why repeating, and sometimes la, 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 oh, la, 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 la. Oops, that's kind of messed up. Let me slow this down. 1 and 2 and 3. Oh, I learned it now. 1 and la, la, la. Oh, it's still happening. There's a thing that is a popular concept, and it's very, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It's to turn up a metronome to play faster and faster. The concept is, of course, to increase technique. Technique is not mandated by speed. It is mandated by accuracy. Accuracy comes from slow, deliberate articulation, and automatically the Jocos and the Richard Bonas and the Hadrian Farads become what they become. But you can't force it, and people should, I recommend, stop doing this.
I completely agree with that, even though I've argued with you in the past over metronomes, but I do, I'll give you an example, right? of when I realized that metronomes weren't helping me, even though I do use metronomes for other things, but I won't even get onto that. We'll just open up another.
Mine is an opinion. People can agree or not. I love you nevertheless, my friend.
But I went through a phase. I was learning the Black Page, which you will know about, the Frank Zappa piece, and I was learning the melody. So I transcribed it, and that was always my thing. I always wanted to learn all these these piano stupid pieces, the melodies, you know. And there's all of that Zappa stuff, as you know, has got like jumps all over the place. It's like crazy leaps. It's those things that make it really difficult. And there was one bit in the middle, and I mean, the piece itself isn't actually a fast. The actual quarter notes per minute is not fast, but there were 16th notes in it. They were all over the place, and so I was practicing this thing, and I was starting off very slow with it, and I was like, it's like, and I was like, oh man, and I got the notes down. It wasn't like I was learning the notes. I got them just at a very slow tempo. So I thought, right, what's my target? I've got to get it to this tempo, and I think it was like, let's say 120 beats per minute, something like 130, whatever it was. So like I'm setting off, and I was like 90 beats per minute, and having a problem, and then I remember putting it up a couple of beats. And I thought, right, I'm going to put it 1 beat a minute, like working my way up. And do you know what? After about 3 or 4 days of doing this over and over again, pushing myself, really, really straining, all I ended up doing was injuring myself. I started getting pains. I was pushing too hard. I was having all these problems. Fast forward about, because that was in the early 90s. So fast forward about 2001, I ended up doing a cruise gig. I think it was the first cruise gig I'd done. And I ended up going away, and it was a ballroom gig. Most of the stuff we were doing was ballroom music, right? So most of it really dull. I'm like that, playing these waltzes and foxtrots and whatever. And I'm sat there, oh God. And it was all very sedate stuff. And anyway, it was like maybe even just, I think that contract was maybe only about 2 months. I came home, but I'd been playing a lot. I mean, we were doing a lot of sets, but it was all very, very sedate stuff. But I came back, and guess what? I could play that damn piece. And it was just because I was playing all the time, but not actually pushing my fingers, and my body. I was just getting so much practice at playing at a slow tempo, just letting the hands do the thing, and I came back and I could play it, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I sat there for all this time just trying with this metronome, just trying to push and build up speed. I ended up doing a bunch of waltzes. I came back and I could play it.
Yeah, but the waltzes didn't do it in a sense. It's the sense that when you practiced your stuff and then allowed it to be seated in you, that without actually much expectation, you automatically reproduced the notes that you took the time to learn. Did you ever see that video of the world's angriest guitar player? You must look this up on the internet.
The title rings a bell. What happens on it?
The angriest guitarist in the world. It's a gentleman. It might be a Scottish fellow. I'm trying to recall. And he has this line, and he's going la 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 la, and he makes a mistake, and he just goes to his own hand. He goes like this, and then in this sort of kind of medium rage, he goes la 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 la, and he's screaming. And I have to admit that if I was there with him, I would have instantly said, don't perform it. Don't do it in time. Relax your hands and conversationally regard the music. And I'm convinced, in a sense, that it seems to be a common, almost 100% response to everybody, that you, having done that, I've done that too, like instead of forcing things, that once I've practiced them enough, it becomes committed. Yeah. And it's always been the slow regard and the careful attention to the notes. And man, if bass players watching this understand this, they're going to change the whole paradigm in terms of learning. Well,
it comes from relaxation. I mean, you can't play fast if you're straining. Mm-hmm. And through all of that's one of the reasons why when I came back to play that tune. It was just, I was relaxed, and it was almost like I'd developed a certain amount. I mean, not finger strength. It wasn't finger strength at all, because we can all do that with our fingers very fast. You know, if you just put them on the table, it's the actual coordination between the hands that you actually need. But I had this conversation with Yannick Wisdala when I was interviewing him, and we had a conversation about technique and about playing slow, and we were just agreeing with the fact that you get all this thing about speed, and I mean, it is a bit immature talking about it anyway, but we all know that comes from playing slow and being aware of the technical issues that you can't practice your technique at speed. You can't practice accuracy at speed. You have to do it slowly so you can see what the fingers are doing, what the mechanics are of what you're doing. If you're doing it wrong, if you can't play something at a slow speed, then you're not going to be able to play it at a fast speed. But people go straight into trying it too fast.
Well, ironically, when I would share that particular message, sometimes people got very upset about it.
Right.
There's unfortunately kind of an angst out there, and I'm okay with it. That's why. May I share a thought? The reason, excuse me, once I got an itch. The reason that I'm online and smack in the middle of a group of people for the last 10 years online, having to interact with people, many of whom don't like what I say, many of whom don't like how I say it, many of whom have tried to, let's say, edit me, correct me, all in the, to say things the way that I think might be more appealing to people. There is a kind of an angst that the mere definition of the pure sense of narrow regard of music, it's almost too much psychologically. And I'm not making this up. There were 150 books written after the Kennedy assassination, each with its own theory. And I saw a show, and a couple of psychiatrists were talking, and they said the reason that there's all these summations and approaches and theories, and what about this, and what happens if this happens, and why didn't this, and the reason that happens is because psychologically sometimes it's tough for us humans to fathom that all we have to do is do this and get better. That it has to be broad, and it's a psychological misnomer to me. And that the idea that a guy went up in a book depository, shot a gun, and changed history was almost too much for the psyche to fathom.
Yeah,
there's the simplistic elements of base learning. I mean, I could change the world, or someone like me, like you cop what I'm saying. We could change everybody's paradigm of bass, but I think it'll happen when people decide that the broad or the variety and the this and the that and the that and the this and the this aren't really direct to the improvement of musicians. So that's why I'm on it. So when I said like what you said, like slow down or get articulate people, some guys got outright offended by that.
That's crazy. Because
and these are the reason I'm with these guys. That's what I wanted to share. I'm there because this is where I can help.
Obviously, you're renowned as being a technical whiz. I mean, that's where it gets weird, because I mean, I would have always looked up to you in terms of your. I know that there's more to you than technical prowess, but that was the thing that you were known for
in those days. Yes,
yeah. Back when Jacko was there and stuff, you were the technique guy. Stanley, you, Jacko, and I mean, obviously now we've got like Hadrian and Richard Bond and Yannick and all that, but all of them will. I mean, if you were to ask, I mean, like I said, I asked Yannick, and Yannick's got crazy chops. It's all about playing slow. Hadrian, that's all. He's not. If you asked Hadrian Farrow about how he got so technically, amazing, it'll all be playing slow. He's not sat there, straining all the time. I mean, it's ridiculous when you see someone like Hadrian, the effortlessness that there is in his actual ability to play across strings. I mean, it just befuddles me completely when I sometimes see it.
I think technically, obviously musically, but technically his ability, I think he's the greatest bass player in the world. I think that nobody has ever approached that particular regard of hand sequence and using it in the harmonic manner that he has subscribed to and arisen to, like Hadrian Farrad. Hadrian is basically otherworldly.
Yeah.
And it's a remarkable thing. I mean,
and it's amazing that some people don't know of him.
Well, the bass players know. Yeah, well, not everyone knows of me either, I guess, just except that I'm kind of an educational troublemaker, I would say, which is, I am. But Hadrian is known amongst bass players. He's our hero.
Yeah, completely. But the number of times that I'll be, somebody will be asking me online about technique or something like that. And, it'll be something to do with, I don't know, some metal tune that I'll be showing them or something like that. And they'll be talking about, whoever. I mean, nothing against metal bass players, but they'll be talking about, I don't know, something to do with finger speed. I don't know, something like that. And then I'll bring up something like that and say, look, if you really want to get into that, if you really want to see how far you can take this, you need to go check out Hadrian Thoreau or someone like Dominic Di Piazza or
Dominic Di Piazza, another one.
Yeah, just incredible. Right. But yeah, anyway, I'll move on to the next one because we've got a few of these to go through. So next up is number 5, your old favorite, no metronomes. You are learning new music. Learning something new is best done out of time, giving you time to figure out what the notes are and where they are located on the bass neck. Now, you don't have to go down that rabbit hole. We all know about the metronome thing. But one thing I will say, right? Yeah. You've changed you've changed my take on something with this. And now, my reading course, I do give examples with metronome. And one thing I did notice is that people kept wanting to use metronomes for the examples. Now, that wasn't what I used the metronome for, ironically. And I've had to really correct people on it. And this is a problem with online teaching, actually. If you're going to demonstrate certain things, certain exercises like that, you've got one of two ways of doing it if you're going to be not in the room with somebody and taking them through. You've got to outline the time in some way. Now, there's one or two ways that you could do this. You could either count along so I could count along as I'm playing it and go 1 E under and 2 under and, work it through that way. Or I have to use a metronome simply to differentiate between I'm not playing now and I'm playing now. So giving examples like that, I used a metronome to outline where the time was. I could have used a drum machine. I could have used any. I could have just counted in. And then, like I say, I could have gone 1, 2. There's a million and one ways I could have outlined the time. But I used the metronome because partly it's a lot easier to do it that way. I can actually just play then and not have to sit there counting everything. So I did that. Problem came with people doing the exercises and feeling like they needed to play along with the metronome. And that is exactly what you're getting at. And it's the problem that you get because then obviously people are feeling the pressure of the metronome. And that's completely antithetical
to learning.
Yeah, to them learning. And I'm like, no, don't use the metronome. Just play it out of time, using your phrases, play it out of time, count it out, count yourself, just do it that way. You shouldn't need the tracks because I actually made tracks of all of them so that people could hear what they were without me having to sit there playing them to them and, them asking me how it was. So I had them as demonstrations, but they were trying to play along to the practice tracks. So all of the stuff that you say to do with metronomes in this sense, I completely agree with. Now, if I was in a one-on-one situation with that student and I'd get them to play it to me and I wouldn't play it to them. I'd get them to play it to me and count it out or they'd just be playing it out of time, like counting it themselves 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, however they want to do it out of time. Don't worry about it.
Correct.
And that's where the problem lies. But like I say, there is, as much as it's annoying, there is a room for the metronome in that instance. And it's very frustrating that I have to do it, but it's kind of a necessity.
Can I share a thought with you that no one in 20 years has ever asked me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I'll take it back. I'm sure some have. Like, why am I so anti-metronome? And the answer is because bass players cannot imagine a musical life without one.
Do you think? I don't.
That's my take on it, that you cannot find or barely find anybody who has the trust in their own ability to believe that they even have the musical ability to play in time without a click. That seems to be a conclusion I came to, and that's also irked a lot of people. But some guy said, I've been practicing with my scales with a metronome for 20 years. I said, that's 19 years, 11 months too long.
Yeah.
I said, the concept is I said, I don't know. My feeling is you must believe that you are not good enough as a musician in order to learn how to play in 4/4 without a metronome. And hey, who are you saying to me? I said, the idea is, and I did it as a shock method, as a statement to be a little bit eye-opening. And I'm not, it has to be a belief, because if someone said that to me, I would have said, oh man, that's an interesting thought. That's how I am. But people that use metronomes judiciously, not even judiciously, that's the wrong word, as a mandate of practice, that thing goes on, they start to practice. They have to believe they don't have the musical talent to learn how to play a line in 4/4, which is generally what a metronome is for. And I'll disagree and say that they do.
I agree with you, but I just don't think. Maybe you're right. I just don't.
No, I'm just offering a thought here.
I just don't see many people using metronomes. I know that it. Do you know what I think's happened here? I think that you've said.
I think a lot less use them now.
Well, I think you've said these things about metronomes, and there's been the pushback. But I think a lot of the people that argue with you about it don't use metronomes as much as they are kind of not pretending to, but like I don't.
They don't use it, but they pretend to. Is that what?
Don't see? I mean, I've got a metronome here. I've got metronomes on my phone. How many times do I use a metronome? I couldn't tell you. I'll tell you when I use a metronome.
Mine
I
is
use them.
Thought, Mark. That's all. Mine have always been thoughts. I don't tell people what to do. I tell people what I believe will happen if they do it. There's a real difference there. I'm not telling people not to use one. I'm telling them if they use it, it's kind of an antithetical or a kind of a redundancy. That's
I do agree with you, but
that's how I feel.
I just don't think many people use metronomes. I've never really seen that many people using them. Not bass players. I know drummers use them a lot, for various things. But bass players, I'll tell you what I think most bass players do.
According to online, everybody does. So.
I know that. I think they're talking rubbish. I think they're lying. I think they're talking out their ass, because I think what happens is they just see it. It's almost like the outrage culture that you get now, where people just get outraged for things, and they just want, and they're kind of virtue signaling in some way, and wanting to actually say, "Oh, Jeff's saying this, and he's full of it, and blah blah blah, and I like Victor, and I don't like you, and I'm gonna say this because of." When they don't use metronomes, I don't even know what you'd practice that much with metronomes, because, like, I'll tell you what most people do: they put on a record and they play along to it. That's the standard practice for most people.
Well, that's the standard. That's the standard performance, because before they can play along with a record, they have to learn the song.
But they're not going to do it with a metronome.
Well, I would agree with you, but some seem to argue with me about that.
I take your. I take your side on that. I mean, but I'd take a different slant. I mean, if I was vouching for you, like if somebody started arguing with you, I would. And I interjected as the kind of like referee. I'd say, well, come on, tell me what you practice with the metronome. I don't practice as much as I should now, but I've practiced a hell of a lot in the past. And how much have I used them? I used one for learning that black page, and it didn't work very well. But I mean, I've done. If I'm going to practice, let's say a walking bass line as a jazz standard, right? I might knock up a practice track or something like that with a chord progression. I wouldn't do it with a metronome. I know that people do sometimes put it on 2 and 4 and they'll practice. And, I have done that in the past occasionally, but most of the time I would prefer playing. Well, I mean, I'd prefer playing along to a band, but if I'm going to do it, I'll probably do it to a track or something like that. But I just don't think they use metronomes a lot.
The reason may be for you because you're a bass player that came from written pitch. That's first, or that in that regard. There's several people that have stood up for metronomes, And no matter when I used to put up things like, showing our James Brown rhythm section, or
a Latin band,
or just I put up videos constantly on my page and saying, look, this is an example of time. It's unlikely that these guys use metronomes in order to obtain the flavor and time subdivision that they have. And inevitably and absolutely guaranteedly, and I think people that may read me may recall these, people will post and go, well, they use it at Berklee, and John Patitucci uses it, and Marcus Miller recommends it, and Will Lee does it here, and Steve Bailey recommends it there, and Victor Wooten recommends it here, and I can't remember the other guys, Lee Sklar, and this and that. And there's inevitability that a bunch of people resting on the endorsement of a metronome by possibly 8 to 10 bass players has helped these people to conclude that they cannot play in time without a click. And there's a theory I have and a concept I have, and it works like this. If you start in a situation of difficulty and solve those things, you're going to be stronger and better for it. And what that means is, can I share a thought?
Yeah.
There is a thing in popular bass consensus, how to groove. I deeply dislike the concept of teaching groove. It's almost a concept that every musician automatically has been able to provide a groove simply by the dint of practicing, playing, doing live gigs. And the automatic result for just about every bassist that one can think of that has obtained a sort of a skill level or a fame level due to their playing ability, maybe 100% of them learned how to groove. A groove became a substitution for learning, where performance superseded first learning how to perform. So my problem with some of the educational things is that a great deal of the things, the lessons, have been designed to prevent people from running into difficulties. And what that means is, like, if you practice, there's a hand stretching exercise. Again, I won't go into the author. I greatly object to it because there's really nothing wrong with people's hands. And that if all classical musicians practiced without devices and stretching and all of the varieties of things, there's a precedent there for it. So the concept of hand things is to anticipate a hand problem that usually doesn't come up unless one overstresses. The teaching of rock, the teaching of blues, the teaching of metal, the teaching with styles, the teaching of how to get in a studio, the teaching of how to lock with a drummer are all entirely self-taught principles. Every class that teaches anything, in my opinion, or just about every class that teaches anything that is not based in the content of music itself has basically been designed to make the road easier for the student, when in fact it long-term makes it harder for them, because our job or our experience is to fall into the mud and get up and learn what we did that made us fall there, and brush off and redo it and practice and stumble and play poorly, and then fix our playing and practice our errors. And it is the bumbling, stumbling, banging along, popping into walls, banging into, turning time around. I have a story to share with you in a second, if I may, about how I almost got beat up in a band in New York for bad time. May I do that in a second?
Yeah.
But it's these concepts that bass education has literally done everything it can to ease out the problems in the road, smoothing them out. You don't need smoothing out. You need to be okay with falling on your face and have maybe one teacher, somebody saying, well, what happened? Let's look at that. But to design classes to solve what everybody has learned by being self-taught is both antithetical to real lifetime learning, because how do you innovate if you're doing what this guy did? How do you innovate? Innovators listen, play, and say, oh, maybe I can do it this way.
Sorry, Jeff. Do people, is that a thing though? Because I've never seen anybody teaching metal bass class. I mean, there's, you could learn how to do it on, I might show how to play a certain bass line on give tips on something on a YouTube channel. But I mean, in a music college, are there actual metal and rock classes? Because I've never seen them.
Well, I don't mean to point a finger at my old alma mater, but go look there and look up. I don't think it's part of the main study program, but there are classes teaching quite a number of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just didn't realize that was a thing. I mean,
I just wanted to address these things to make people aware of them.
Yeah,
The schools aren't going to change, and I know nobody that the teachers. It's not my job, or I know they're locked into it, and I think it would be an incredibly remarkable thing if the whole systems were washed over and replaced, but I know that's not going to happen. So these little chats and stuff is just to advise people that until they demand better, higher quality education, they ain't going to get it in the general sense. So that's my thing. Can I tell you the story about how
go for it.
I played with Ray Barretto in New York, and he had a Latin band. There was a guy named Fidel. He was in the horn section, and Ray, I played with him in France one night. We had a gig, and he hired me when we got back to New York. And so I'm playing my thing.
Is this back in the 70s?
Yes, it is. And the band hated my guts, and they were Cuban guys. It was a Cuban group, and there was a guy named Fidel. And man, Joe, can I say certain language?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
You motherfucker, I'm going to kick your ass. You play like a fucking white boy, motherfucker, got kicked you. And they were all like intimidated, man. I was really free. Get the fuck out of here, man. We need a real bass player. So instead of quitting, I went home, and Ray was sympathetic because he wanted a fusion. He wanted that thing, but the musicians didn't. So I went out and I bought, I think, I'm trying to recall, Sal Cuevas and salsa groups. And I spent two weeks or so just deeply, I mean, every day, listening and determined to try to, in a couple of weeks, at least absorb the essence of what it is that they wanted. And I felt that I did. And as I played it over the rehearsals and whenever we did stuff, I saw the horn players smiling at me going, there you go, man. You sound good, man. This sounds good. And that's my Spanish accent, man.
It's like Scarface.
Anyway, I'm trying to think of a Scarface. You are cockroach, you know that? You ain't cockroach. Oh, what was the line? Okay, Manny, do your thing. So anyway, that was a life lesson where I was quite intimidated. Man, I was scared. I mean, I was going to get literally beat up. And Mittens was uptown New York, and in the 40s when guys used to sit in Mittens. I mean, I heard these stories from older musicians in New York, and somebody, I can play, and they couldn't play. Often musicians took it outside and showed their displeasure. So there's a serious element that I needed to be threatened, although thank God it didn't come to fruition, in order to be inspired to get into my thing, to fall down, to sound bad, and to learn from it. And that is exactly what music schools have prevented all students from doing. And I think they've whitewashed bass education, and I'm the big mouth that stands up for bass players by saying you can get better if you want it. And I really hope that that's my focus, to help people. Just be aware, then decide.
Yeah, well, number 6, don't perform.
We'll be here on 9 o'clock. Go ahead.
Don't perform. This goes with metronomes in that you should put focus on figuring out the notes on the page and how to play them on your bass. So, I mean, we've talked about that previously. That it's practice, not performance. 7, mistakes. You're going to make them. This is no big deal. If you misread the same notes or passage 25 times, remember that maybe you needed 25 mistakes to finally learn those particular notes. And that's basically what you're saying there with the band stuff. I mean, it's like I keep saying to people about you will get more out of even playing one gig. One gig is going to do more for you in terms of just overall knowledge of what you're actually going to be doing and you're playing than 24 hours of bad practice. I mean, fair enough. If you're doing decent practice, it can be profitable. But playing live with other musicians is where that's where you learn all this stuff, and I mean, that's where you're making mistakes, because it's easy. I know some people would say, well, you want to make mistakes in practice, not on the stage, but I don't know, man.
I'll agree with that. You don't want to make mistakes on the stage. You want to accept that if you make the mistakes on the stage, nothing as bad is going to happen, and we learn from that. That's all that it is.
Yeah, I mean, the times that everybody makes mistakes every night on stage. Everybody knows that, and but those mistakes, most of the time, I find that if anybody that's any good, you won't make the same mistake twice, though. If you make that mistake, you know what you're going to have to work on, because if it it's very an unforgiving thing to be making mistakes on stage. But
I mean, I'll just add a thought. Live music is like live theater. It's like live dance. I mean, somebody falls and you can practice all day and all night, but you're going to stub your toe and go over, or you're going to forget the line, or you're going to make a mistake on the bass. Or I made a big faux pas with Yes when I toured with Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe. Big one, huge one. And the heck with it. I mean, I wasn't bothered. I mean, I'm sorry I did it, but it's
you can't do anything about it. I mean, it's that in the moment thing, isn't it? When you're on stage, you have to let it go. So so number 8, it doesn't matter what you play like starting out. It doesn't matter what you played like starting out. Oh yeah, it doesn't matter what you play like starting out. It only matters where you end up. Take comfort in this fact: the only academic approach to learning an instrument that gives everyone the best chance at improving their playing is practicing harmonically sound music. This approach worked for over 3 centuries, and it produced every musician in history. And obviously, we've already expanded on that. I'll quickly run through these. Number 9, take a year or more. This is why I didn't assign, say, a page or less than a week. Some can stick to this schedule and others can't. You have enough music to practice for months to over a year, so take whatever time you need to go through the music. Again, that is so invaluable, and that's...
Thank you.
Is another one of those things where and another problem with the online space that I found. I mean, I still love doing what I do, obviously, but I find these problems in trying to do it when you're not doing it one-on-one. And one of them is that if you do a course, the reading course as an example, people are always in a hurry to move from one lesson to the next lesson to the next lesson.
Always,
this page, this page. And if they're left to their own devices, they'll just move through, and then they come to me at the end. They've done the whole of the first level. It's in 9 levels, right? They'll get to the end of the first level, and then I'll get an email saying, "Oh, I've just done this one, and I was going through those sample etudes at the end because I've got the longer etudes that you can work through, and I wasn't really able to sight read through them." And I'm like, "Well, that is because one of the things I specify is if you really want to test yourself to see how you can, as a sight reading test, just try going for it, just at the end. You can just learn them in your own time." And they come back and they said they can't sight read it. And I'm like, "Well, how long have you been going?" And it's maybe 3 weeks that they've got through the whole thing. And I'm like, "Oh man, this could take a year. It could take 10 years. You don't know how long it's going to take you to get to that point." And that's number 9 there in my experience anyway.
Right. Sure.
So so that's that. And then number 10, nothing that you love about bass playing is replaced. If you love rock, slap, or metal, these lessons were never meant to replace anything about your playing that you don't wish to stop doing, which again is another important thing, because there's a very strange thing that people say where they think that learning to, let's say, read is going to affect the rest of the playing, which again is
unfortunately they need music teachers to tell them the opposite, and I lament that there aren't teachers. I don't have enough people. I don't know if it's a lack of understanding or a contrary to business. I don't know, but I'll accept the fact that I'm mostly alone and absolutely unafraid to share thoughts like this publicly. But I wish people would understand that reading is an addition, not a replacement.
Yeah, it's quite logical. It's a logical thing because, I mean, I said it on your group the other day that, if you are learning a language and you think that learning to read that language is going to affect your speech, well, that's just illogical. Of course, it's not going to do that. All that you're going to do is expand your communicative, abilities. It just it makes absolutely no sense. But yeah, those 10 points that you specified, I'm going to keep that as a text file on my computer that I can pull out whenever. Because I think it's very important. I think those 10 points cover a lot of the things that need saying to people when they're embarking on that kind of journey.
I can see the fear of embarking on that journey, especially if people undertake it on their own. And that's the one thing I think I would recommend to everybody is to not undertake reading on your own. Get a teacher. And since it's rare that you'll find a Mark Smith around who can read and teach reading, go find an upright bass teacher. It's just notes. Find somebody who teaches the pitches and teaches you the rhythms. It doesn't have to be a bass teacher, because I personally don't believe that just about anybody really needs bass lessons. I've never really believed that.
Yeah.
For the most part.
I think you're right. Yeah. I like all the best lessons that I've ever had in academia were harmony lessons, arranging lessons, things like that. I learned more from strict harmony and theory and oral and ear training lessons and things like that were non-bass related, away from the bass. I learned so much more in those than I ever have in any kind of bass lessons, and it had a direct impact on my bass playing. Not because I was applying it directly. It's just that everything else made sense. I always say this about chord. I mean, you're a big advocate of chord tones and all that stuff.
I started the chord tone sort of awareness. It never was out till I paid attention to it. I'm quite proud of that. That's all.
Yeah. And I came to that in a completely different way, because it was just a case of I was learning harmony. So for me, learning chord construction, tertian harmony, all of that kind of stuff, when it came to learning arpeggios and all that, it was just a case of, well, I know what the notes of the chords are. So, and I know the construction of the chords. You have to know that to be able to read a chord symbol. I mean, and a thorough grounding in chord construction and harmony principles. You don't really need bass lessons in it to actually then have that knowledge on the instrument. As long as you know what the notes are, you can identify intervallic, the intervals within there and all of that stuff, and then move things through keys. That's all you really need.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, that's sort of one of the sort of signs of unfortunately, a kind of an unwell bass academic community that tends to be very insulted, not unreasonably, that I would say this clearly and distinctly. That I would never, Mark Smith and his ways, that's not me. It's that principle that is taught by Mark. And I've also opened the door that anybody can criticize my educational acumen anytime they want, if my sort of narrow thing. So I agree with you about the bass lesson element. I think that it's sort of a signal of a slightly unwell system financed by well-meaning young people that don't really quite know that they're not getting what they should get as students. That's my opinion about it. So,
well, here's my it's not a pushback, because I said it.
Push away.
Pushback. Well, yeah, but it's not a pushback. This is something that I just wanted to put forward to you, because I know that you don't kind of get it. So my way of putting a lot of the let's think the bass community at large, right? Now, obviously there is a large percentage of them that I'll interact with through things like YouTube and the online space. A lot of those ones that are people that are part of this, and Scott's bass lessons, they're all there online, right? So you kind of get to interact with these people, see what they kind of want and what they're doing and all this kind of stuff. And what I think it is that the majority of people that are going for, let's say, watching lessons that I might do on maybe a Metallica song or something like that, where I break it down and then just show something like that. A lot of people are just wanting an experience. I think that's the best way to put it. they're not interested. I don't mean everybody. I just mean there's a certain contingent, right? That aren't interested in a traditional methodology because they think it's boring. And to be fair, they're probably right in that sense, by how they judge what boring is. So they're not interested in that. Now, I know that you always break it down into the self-taught academic thing, as like a dichotomy there, which I think in this sense is almost a false dichotomy, because I think what you get there is you get the people that aren't wanting that traditional thing, or at least they don't know that they want it. They might do if they were presented with it, but they're looking to just learn some tunes, right? Learning some tunes.
Right.
Also, they want other parts of the experience. Now, the way that you presented self-taught is that, well, you might as well just learn things from records. So, and that is true. But I think what they also want, and I know this was true of me when I was first starting out before I became more academically minded, is that, I'd get Hot Licks videos by Stu Ham and blah, 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 all these different guys. I wasn't looking for a academic pathway or a roadmap. I wanted some tips. I was going to enjoy the experience of it. I wanted experience, right? You could present something and say, you're not going to get where you want it to go with this. You would be better doing this. And they're going to push back at it. But they're not really bothered, because what they're actually just wanting is, like I say, that experience, this particular ride that they're on. They want what they want. And who are we to actually say that what they want is wrong? Now, fair enough. If I was to present a certain amount of reading to them and all this stuff, that they might take it on board, but a lot of them probably won't. And I think that is when the pushback comes, because then they'll see you saying all these things about Victor and all this kind of stuff, the conflicts going on there. And they're just wanting this general experience, and they're going to talk to, they might be following Victor. And you kind of see where I'm coming from with this.
100%.
That's what they want. And that, I think, now I've got a little analogy that I wanted to put to you. I think that when you go to, let's say, I know that you were a bit, not upset, but you were wondering why there was such pushback with this when you were saying something on Victor's page. There was a lot of pushback on Victor's page, right?
It was.
Typical thing, right?
It was.
And my analogy for that is it's a little bit like an atheist walking into a church and just saying, you lot don't know what you're talking about. And then going down that, or criticizing them, or trying to get into logical debate with them, when they're all just there because they're just there for the community side of it. And I think that's where a lot of this pushback comes from. And that's why I keep saying that, because I've got a lot of this respect for you, and I really like the stuff that you put forward, and I'm right there with you. As you know, I agree with all of this stuff, right? But I sometimes think that it all gets
muddled.
It's just a big mush where the message isn't getting there, because you've got this other contingent of people that probably wouldn't be interested in that anyway. They just want the experience, this experience. I don't mean experience in playing, an experience of this stuff. Sure.
I would be remiss if I didn't notice that everybody, even the people that just want the experience, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that everybody wants the exact same thing. And that thing is to play the ideas they hear in their head, or to play the ideas that somebody else hears in their head. And to do so, people are going, let's say, to Scott's bass lessons, or go to Berklee, or go to a Wooten camp, or go to Facebook, or go to different areas. And the tips that you're referring to, I might look at it as seeking out ways to find the ability to play to some degree. So the experience, even I thought of this a while ago, that even a golfer, like a guy in a neighborhood, will go to a golf club, go to the golf pro, and be taught how to hold the club, never expecting to be a professional golfer, but to eke out the pleasure of the experience of golf. I've discovered there are more amateur non-pro interested, because my father was a golfer. I grew up with it, so I've seen it. There are more people like that willing to pay for perfection in instruction in regards to grip, in regards to placing your feet, in regards to all of it, so that they can eke out the pleasure of the amateur and the personal experience of the sport. Because I don't particularly think people really get much pleasure out of standing out there and swinging away, and the ball dribbles to the right and pops to the left. Now, bass players, I noticed, all want what I want, and all want what you want, and all want what Jocko wanted, and all want what Stanley wanted, and all wanted what Rabath wanted. They just wanted at different degrees of want. And the want is, we all want to have a little liberty on this instrument. That's real. I'm just talking, I'm not doing more than explaining my reasons. So the people that push back, if they're interested, what I'm suggesting I never said, and this is where it gets interesting, don't do the things you want, don't go to the camps, don't do the rock, don't do it. In fact, I said it right there. Don't stop doing anything that you want. What I'm giving everybody is an additional few minutes a day, so that everybody that goes elsewhere looking for learning can go to me or to you and get a lean, perfect way to identify a pitch and play it on a neck. And that is the whole gist of this. But mixed into this, I've had people say, I suck. And I'm proud that I suck. This is not an uncommon thing. I mean, people are saying, and I don't, whatever. And I'll comment, I'll say, if you wish to suck, then don't go to the Scott Devine, and don't go to Berklee sites, and don't go to clinics, because you've determined that mediocrity is your goal. And to everybody else, if the idea of find liberty and a little bit of musical freedom, that's why I've always said there is only one proven way to improve, and that is by looking at a written note and playing it, which is a synapse developing element, which is a hand-eye physical developing a thing, so that when you listen to the music you love, you go, oh, that's what that is. It's liberating. Was always my intention. And then until you brought it up, which I appreciate, nobody ever asked me.
But I know, and I know it comes from a good place. They can make the decision. I'm not saying this that people have to do it. I'm explaining, trying to give you an answer to a very fair question and comment on your part. Yeah, but I think the reason that I think they'll kind of a certain amount. Some people won't. They'll go with it. They'll say, yeah, I'm interested in everything. I really want to expand every aspect of my playing. But there will be a certain contingent, and I think it's larger percentage than not. I think they're just looking for an experience of something, and I know that because I'd say exactly the same thing. I know that you'd say they shouldn't be in charge of their own learning. A teacher gives you things. That's what you're paying for. You're not paying to get what you want out of something necessarily. And I agree with learning, especially one-on-one and stuff like that. It leads me on to something else that I thought I'd explain to you. Especially to do with the YouTube thing, because I obviously have a YouTube channel like Scott has one and blah, blah, blah. And one thing you'll notice when you look at any of my lessons is that a lot of the things that I actually talk about and actually demonstrate in courses and things like that, I actually don't, I do bits of it, but I'll use tab. I'll use a lot of things that look like, oh, this is the kind of stuff that, isn't academically sound and all these kind of things, but there's a very good reason for it. And that is reach. Because I know as somebody that's tried developing a channel online, that if you don't basically use, for want of a better word, clickbait, and use things that people desire, people that they're looking for. I mean, I'm sure that you've experienced this with doing stuff online. You will not be seen. You will just be another little whisper in that whole massive surge of everything that there is out there. And so to do that, you have to be very, very strategic and very, very tactical. And it's the reason why someone like Scott is an absolute wizard at that. I mean, I've known Scott since forever. We went to college together, but I know that he's very tuned into that, and that's how he developed so fast. And it's why my channel's been doing quite well with stuff like that, because you have to develop the channel based on what people are going to want to see, as opposed to what might be good for them necessarily. Because if it was that case, I'd just be teaching, the stuff that I would teach in a course or in a college, stuff like that. But it's not. And that's all about funneling people in. Once people are in there, once you've got people and you can actually get them, you can talk to them, that's when you can start to bring in stuff like that. And that's why it's kind of like a softly approach, I suppose, from that sense. But I have a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of people, that like doing my reading course and that do my chord tone courses and things like this. I've got an applied harmony course that I'll be doing, and various other things, an ear training course. Hundreds of people that do that would never have done that if they hadn't have found me through Tab and a Metallica tune that they saw on there, or whatever it is, like a beginner thing that's just real baby steps kind of things that I might put out there. But the upside to it is that eventually those people get the message and they come and they see that, and they might buy a course that then brings them onto something else. Like I always feel sometimes like a bit of a bit weird about it, because I know that the people like you and people out there will be seeing these lessons that I'll put out on YouTube, that because they do the rounds, and they'll be like, he's putting Tab out there, he's doing this, it's all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but there's a reason for that, and it's all to do with this, and that's another reason why. Sorry to go on about it, but like,
no, it's your time, buddy. I'm very pleased to listen.
It's one of the other reasons why I say that about the, let's say the Victor Wooten thing and the pushback and all of that stuff. That I love the stuff that you do and that you put out there, and I just wish that it didn't have the extra. Like I said, the peripheral kind of mush that that happens, where it all gets kind of lost in translation. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that anyway.
Well, my comment is, and it's quite clear for me to share, is I don't want to pull anybody in. I don't want to convert anybody. I don't want to pull them in. I don't want anybody to come over to me or go and look into the learning of the instrument if they aren't interested in learning how to play better. I look at it this way, speaking for myself, I'm okay. I mean, a guy posted the other day, I think a Wooten Facebook page with 575,000 members or followers, and mine has 15,000 members and followers, and said, you see, you're not as respected as Victor is. I wrote an answer, but I'll sum it up in sort of the thing is that these type of comments don't affect me in the slightest. Forgive me, I haven't the slightest wish to pull anybody in, convert anybody. People say, you're pushing people away from music because you're not doing these things. I said, you can't push anybody away from playing if they're determined to play. It can't happen.
Yeah.
Kids have left home and abandoned their families because you ain't going to be a musician, and they wanted to be. So I'm not interested, speaking for me, in the slightest of doing anything but offering an opportunity to anybody whatsoever that wants to acquire a little bit of musical freedom. I'm never going to get 500,000 followers, and I will never use Tab. And I will never.
I want them to see you. I like your message. This is the frustrating thing for me. I know that you don't.
Well, I don't care, and I don't mean it in a disrespectful way, and I appreciate your thought. I'm just saying is that what I've got is here. Take it or leave it. You can lead a horse to water. We are dealing with adult men and women who have to be treated with kid gloves because the truth of learning seems to be too distasteful for the majority of people, which always led me to believe that really people don't want to learn how to play music. But see, what I do is I plant seeds. I think that when the people that hear this, once they may get over the shock of it, because there's nobody like me in the things that I share, once I plant seeds everywhere. If you want this, come and get it. But I'm not going to come after people and try to, come on, you're an adult, but I'm going to just wheel you in. It's just not me. I'll stay with the 15,000 or 10,000. I made a comment once that if I'm not looking for the gig, but if I was at Berklee, let's say, and ran the department, I would revamp the whole thing and convert back to an entirely music-focused lesson program, teaching people at their different levels. That's the thing that really identifies us as different. And what would instantly happen is probably half the students would leave. But those that remained would have gotten the best base education of their lives. So it's this sort of philosophy I have. I mean, no harm, but I like looking at adult people as adult people. I like talking with them as real. Smoking causes cancer. Make your decision. Tabs isn't the way you're going to improve. If you don't agree, use tab. Rock classes aren't going to improve because everyone that plays rock learned as self-taught players. Even the teachers of rock are self-taught, and even the teachers of slap are all self-taught. If you don't agree, I'll keep putting out the message, because slowly, I'm the only voice I feel that is slowly eking out from this sort of a group of people, a few individuals that say, oh, well, that's interesting. No one's told me this before. Oh, I understand this. So I'm doing my bit, but I'm doing it at the corner, over the hill, down the back of the alley that nobody can see. And
I agree, but I wouldn't say that it's using kid gloves for it. It's not that necessarily the approach.
I hear you.
It's more that,
I'm just
like I say, you can get lost in the noise of online, and if you don't, and I don't mean for you to do that, I just mean I'm just justifying why I would do it,
and I think
because I've got vested interest, I've got courses that I'd like to sell, but there is obviously behind all of that, regardless of whether someone buys your books, they buy courses, whatever they do, there has to be some underlying content around that's nothing to do with the actual price and the sale of it and all of that. There has to be a truth within that, at the core of that. So yeah. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you that I can't believe I've never asked you, because I've done this 3 times now. But
I'm married, but thanks anyway.
Yeah, it was going to be. Now, you started out on violin, classical violin, very strict classical. When you moved on to bass, it was very much Jack Bruce, the Beatles, all of that stuff. At some point, you became a jazz aficionado to whatever extent you would say, because I know that you're not. I know you wouldn't consider yourself a jazz bassist. You're a musician, right? That can do pretty much anything.
I'm a jazz player, I'm a rock player.
Exactly. But if somebody was to say, oh, he's just a jazz player, or he's just, there's nothing worse than somebody saying, oh, he's just a rock player, he's just a jazz player, But at some point, you started down the jazz road. So when did that happen?
At Berklee.
Right. So it was the college thing that got you going.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Berklee at the time was entirely dedicated to academics. The reason I use the word academic, I know you don't like the word, you like traditional. Academic, to me, speaks of something that is not artistic or necessarily usable, but is teachable. That's the reason why I use academic. Yeah. There's no art, there's no heart, there's no feeling, there's no emotion. There is the function of this note or this rhythm that leads to the next, that teaches me that particular individual lesson in my instrument. Okay, that's why I use the word academic. But I like your traditional. I understand that. When I went to Berklee, I met Gary Burton. John Schofield was there. We were students together. We were in a band together. Steve Smith was there. Pat Metheny was there. Mike Stern was there. Vinnie Colaiuta was there. Abe Laboriel was there. There's more. There's Joe Lovano was there. Jay Anderson was there. And the school was entirely a jazz school, kind of the earlier version of the later Schillinger House. Yeah. And Gary Burton was there. Steve Swallow was there. It was all a jazz school. And that introduced me to the genre I heard about that.
Had you not played jazz before that at all?
I came right out of Cream, right out of Hendrix, right out of the Beatles. And these guys would go, on a clear day, you see forever, and I thought to myself, all right, and, but there was, I caught my background prepared me to understand this new paradigm that I was involved with. So I became immersed in the jazz environment of Berklee in 72 to 75. Practicing, and I took the arranging composition course because I didn't take the performance because it's a personal thing here. I never quite felt that I needed to pay a school to be taught how to perform, since for the most part I couldn't think of any performers in any style beforehand that did this. So I went into arranging and composition, and that's what I did. School. Yeah, sure. I wanted to learn about how this worked, and drop 2, drop 4. I still remember drop 2, drop 4. Wonderful, eye-opening, life-changing. I owe my whole career to the school. They changed me permanently. They educated me beyond my wildest dreams because the entire focus was music. Can I share one thought? In the 1920s, they had, I would say, Big Spiderbeck kind of small jazz groups, New Orleans. The 30s was Louis Armstrong, small bands. 40s was Glenn Miller, maybe Benny Goodman, you know what I mean? Cal Tjader, Bobby Shore. 1950s was rock and roll, Fats Domino, Elvis Presley, Little Richard. 1960s was Beatles, etc. All those groups. 70s was disco, I guess, followed that new wave. 90s, whatever each era that begat its new style, whatever style was happening, G major was in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's this concept that the core and the learning element gave me a career for 50 years that no matter what style has come along, I've managed to be a part of it, flourish in it, so that when that style went away, I might adapt to the new style and be able to play. And this, to me, was what Berklee gave me at that time. I felt that today, by being taught the conveniences and available styles and technology, let's say of 2022, might be setting people up for obsolescence. Because once these things go away or change over, if they haven't learned music, it's going to be really hard to stay in the music industry just by what you were taught before. That no longer is applicable to today. So I've always felt that there was flaws in education and base education that seem real clear to me. And I guess I share them just so that people might think about it and agree or not agree, because I want to share one thought. I mean nobody harm. I mean for thought, and I mean to offer clear thought pertaining to content, never to people or institutions to cause them harm. I think people don't really understand that, so I wanted to share it.
But you must have developed very quickly then in your jazz, the jazz side of you, because I mean, it wasn't that long after that you were playing with Bill Bruford and going through all of that stuff. And so you must. What was your main, let's say, private practice? What was the main stuff that you were practicing through that period, through the 70s? Was it mainly transcription?
Wow. Oh, certainly transcriptions. The Berklee thing was harmony, was arranging and composition, harmony, ear training. The bass lessons at the time weren't really substantive. they were good teachers, but I could deal with the lessons because they didn't equal the difficulty of the music that I studied on violin. So I would adapt quite quickly. When I got to New York, I started gigging instantly and with a lot of good names. But at the same time, I wanted to keep learning. So I would do transcriptions. And one of the earliest transcriptions I did, and this is, again, years before transcriptions became a thing, is I took Cannonball Adderley's, I was doing transcriptions, but this one killed me. Cannonball Adderley's Marabi solo, and wrote it out. And then I recorded it about 8 years later. So I was doing these things, transcribing and playing in New York. So that was the self-taught paradigm that I often put next to being taught. And that gave me the freedom to expand and understand other music. And then I got really lucky and got with Bill Bruford, who was adept at sharing things about live playing or recording and things that aren't necessarily school oriented. And I learned in real time because I was already musically prepared to do so. So that's about my nutshell, or two nutshells, this description of my background. Yeah,
because I mean, your vocabulary must have developed fairly quickly, but do you attribute that mainly to the transcribing that you would be doing?
100%. The transcribing gave me an insight. When I saw, I thought, I never would have thought of this.
Yeah.
So, whatever, and by doing this a lot, there was I called it the 3 vitamin benefit. 1, you're using your ear by writing out a solo. 2, you're writing it out, so you're learning to enhance, to regard yet again, the writing process. And 3, by practicing it, my bass is improving, my bass playing. So transcription was, for me, nothing equaled it. Except maybe live playing, perhaps, but nothing equaled in terms of learning, doing a transcription. And I got a whole cabinet here with this. Yeah. I mean, stacks of them, because I wanted to know, how did Coltrane do that? How did Keith Jarrett do that? I was curious, and I learned a lot.
Yeah, I was very. It was frustrating.
How about you?
I mean, one of the videos that I did recently was I was talking about transcription, and like whenever I do the lessons that I do online, the ones that I always think are going to be the most valuable to people, they never do very well, right? So I did one on Billy's Bounce, and I was taking apart Miles Davis's solo on there, and because it's quite odd is what he plays on it. And so I talked about transcription, saying exactly what you were saying there. It's like all the benefits that you get from transcription. I mean, it's everything. I mean, it's the best ear training, isn't it? I mean, it's just brilliant. I mean, and you get to play things that you wouldn't ordinarily play on bass, and Can
I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. Did you, by transcribing, did you get to a place where you could transcribe in real time? I never slowed solos down. So when a guy went, I could hear those phrases after a minute. I was curious if you got that too. Some
stuff not. It depends what it is. It's like, I'm not like you. I'm not at that level. But I mean, I don't usually have to slow it down that much. I mean, I still do. I mean,
why not?
Some stuff
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And let me just share something. The reason that I can do these things is because I had a benefit that most people don't. I was a violinist from early child, 5 to 15. Let me tell you what, man, that little coincidence, plus the jazz training that I had got me to see music as an overview. And, that maybe some people might not see. Ali used to say, you don't know what I know. I can see above everybody. It sounded like an egotistical thing, but just those 2 experiences and the homogenizing of them gave me a view that I never would have had without it.
Yeah, and I used to play more, because like when I first started out, I was playing more classical than I was jazz. I was like you, I didn't get into jazz until I was at music college. So when I was before that, though, I was pretty into playing classical stuff on bass. So I learned a lot of Bach stuff. I learned that. I did that video of it recently. The the second prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier that you play as well. But I learned that a lot before I heard you do it. I know that you did it as well, but I just got it from the Well-Tempered Clavier. So I used to work my way through the preludes and fugues, and I always found that because I came on quite quick technically when I was younger, and a lot of my friends, they didn't. They were like, just playing bass lines or whatever, and I was playing all these classical things just because I was an idiot. Well, not an idiot, but
you're not an idiot.
I just wanted to do them, and so, but things like that made such a difference to my technique. In like it kind of turbocharged that initial, those early days when you're practicing, because it's hard to do in it when you get after 20, 30 years of playing. You can't do the same practice that you used to do. So those first few years are really, really important, I think. And so I did a lot of that. But then when it came to all the transcribing thing, I'd already been transcribing a lot of classical stuff, because some stuff I just didn't have the scores. So I just have records and stuff, and I'd be sat there learning melodies. And I think learning melodies is that's the thing. A lot of people just spend time trying to learn bass lines, and it's like, well, if you actually started transcribing melodies instead, you can hear them at least. Like most of the time, you can't hear what a damn bass is doing. So it was more that. I was just actually trying to learn those. But then gradually, I did a lot of work as a transcriber later on. Like for Scott, actually, I used to do the transcriptions for a lot of his courses because we know each other. So I'd be doing that. So I get bits of work doing it. But it's... I still have to, I don't trust my ear the way that I know a lot of my friends that are like brilliant ears. I'll still sit there with my bass so that I know that I'm getting things right. And I can write it down without the bass there, but I always like to know that I'm doing it right and I'm not wasting my time. So I think with melody, like you said about classical stuff, because of the background you'd got in violin, I think when you're working on repertoire like that, you get an instinctive kind of thing going on where you get to hear arpeggio movement and see and arpeggios through and scale movement through chord sequences a lot, and you just get to know, a major arpeggio sounds like that, a first inversion sounds like that, a second inversion sounds like that, a cascade of certain scale moves sounds like that, because you're playing it. And then you don't really need oral exercises to actually learn that, because you play them and you know what they sound like. So I think that's where the transcription comes in as well, because if you're hearing Charlie Parker solos and you're working on those, you're instinctively going to develop more bebop vocabulary. Not that I'm a very good bebop player, but like you get more of you kind of digest it that way, I think.
I hear you.
So
I'm with you.
Yeah,
this is a wonderful hang, Mark. I gotta tell you, this is.
Yeah, I'll get moving though, because I've taken too much time already.
You're not. See, this is good for people. It's important. People ought to hear stuff and regard it, and then take it or chuck it in the garbage as they want. But I want to thank you very much for being so open and chatting with me and allowing me to share some of these thoughts. It's really rare. I've asked around other guys, like, would you like to do an interview and discuss these things? And they go, well, because it can be touchy. The people are a little concerned about earning the ire, I think, of some people might maybe, so you're a brave soul, and you're clearly a gifted musician and teacher. And thank you for having me.
But that's why I said, I know there's a truth at the core. And that's why I like to get your message out there. And I'll quote you a lot, even though it's kind of almost become a bit of a joke these days with me when I do like things online or anything like that. Like I'll bring up the Jeff Berlin quote, and people just know. I start laughing when I start bringing it up now, because it's so obviously a Jeff Berlin quote, usually to do with, well, maybe not metronome stuff, but academic music, that kind of stuff. I'll often quote you on those kind of things.
Oh, thank you. And it's okay. I mean, I'm 100% open and appreciative of the people that may, laugh or giggle or, get a thing out of it. At the very least, they heard the thoughts. So maybe the first instinct is to just, see it as humorous. That's the organic first step. Step 2 might be, well, wait a minute. And step 3 might be, forget this guy, I'm going to chuck it in the garbage. the seed was planted, the ideas are out, and people will make good decisions.